So recently, a bunch of unaired pilots found their way online, dating back to the 90s. What I want to do is look at these pilots and determine two things. 1, did it have potential? And 2, how different would popular culture be if this pilot was picked up for series? Today we're opening up the pilot vault and looking at the pilot for a show called The Ghost Writer. Now, this sitcom starred Anthony Perkins, who you may remember as Norman Bates in Psycho. Already a bit of an odd choice for a sitcom, but hey, we'll give it a shot. The premise of this sitcom is Perkins plays a horror writer living in a spooky house and dealing with the supernatural. What I love about this is how Anthony plays a guy named Anthony. It's as though we got the same advice that Will Smith got when he signed up for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will was told that people were going to be shouting his character's name wherever he went, so we may as well have them shout his own name. The problem here is nobody went on to shout Anthony's name. If anything, he was just called Norman Bates for the rest of his life. I wonder if he suffered from children not liking him the same way that the Wicked Witch did. He died pretty young, I think he was in his 50s or something, so I suppose he never really talked about it. Now, this was originally planned as a mid-season replacement in August 1988, and it was made by Alan Spencer, the creator of Sledgehammer, that satirical police comedy show that was quite the hit. Apparently, the network loved the idea of Ghost Writer because the concept reminded them of a certain movie that had just hit cinemas, Beetlejuice. So, desperate to make some of that Beetlejuice money, they hurried this sitcom into production and made a pilot, bigging it up as the world's first scarecom. But I'm pretty sure that Gene Wilder tried making a scarecom a few years prior in Haunted Honeymoon. That's a great movie. Gilda Radner, Dom DeLuise, really underrated. For whatever reason, Fox didn't like what the pilot ended up being. Well, I say for whatever reason, you'll see when we get into it. So they dumped it into the 9:30 slot on a Wednesday. It was basically meant to make it disappear. The show that led into it was a sitcom called Malloy, starring that woman from The Big Bang Theory. She had 2 shows on at the time, the other being Blossom. So yeah, not the funniest show to get, the people watching in the mood for comedy, but to be fair, this show wasn't exactly comedy. It wasn't really funny. We'll get into that in a moment. Anthony Perkins stars as Anthony Strack, a best-selling horror writer who has recently married Elizabeth, his new wife, after the death of his first wife. We start with Elizabeth and her daughter Cindy. Cindy finds the house to be really creepy, just like her new stepfather. She says that Strack is some kind of killer, perhaps hinting at his history as Norman Bates. Whatever it is, she's pretty scared of the guy. Anthony says something about killing time. Why do I get the feeling that this thing is going to be full of him making jokes about him being a murderer? Just bad puns. Elizabeth tells Anthony that her daughter thinks he's a murderer, to which he says, I used to think that my dad was a murderer. Well, we know he wasn't the biggest fan of his father. Sorry, I promise this entire thing isn't just Psycho joke. He makes a joke about being a killer, and then runs at his wife with an axe, but it's alright, he's just hanging it up. We then meet his son, Edgar, who gives me Freddy vibes, from Frasier's son. I've always thought it was weird how they named Frasier's kid Freddy, because that's the same name as the guy who murdered Kelsey Grammer's sister in real life. Hard to imagine that never came up in conversation. Elizabeth tries to bond with Anthony's son, but he bites her. Edgar's a little weirdo, isn't he? I'm getting really bad vibes from him. Anthony then says, aren't you happy to have a little sister to do things to? To which Edgar smiles and takes her upstairs. Yeah, no, I don't like this. I'm getting really bad vibe. Anthony and Elizabeth aren't bothered about the crime that's going on here. We're then introduced to the portrait of Anthony's dead wife. It's the anniversary of her death. Cindy screams upstairs. Yeah, that's to be expected. We all saw that coming. It turns out that Edgar has blur there. No, don't worry, it's just some fake leg. We're safe, they can't demonetize us. Let's just move on and not talk about it. Right, watch this clip.
Edgar, I have no qualms about disciplining you.
Please do.
I love to be disciplined.
What am I meant to say about this? It's so weird. The characters are just odd and incredibly unlikable. What am I meant to say about any of this? So what's weird about this pilot is, Anthony Perkins died 2 years after filming it. So even if this show had been the best thing ever made, it could have only lasted 2 seasons at most. So we're not really missing out here. Some of these shows make me wonder about how different popular culture would be had the pilot I'm looking at been picked up for a full series, but this one, being a hit, really wouldn't have made much of a difference at all. Anthony gets a call from his publisher and tells him he's had no good ideas lately. Meanwhile, Edgar tries to decapitate himself in the background. Not funny. Right, I'll tell you what, I hate to say this because I loved him in Psycho and Anthony Perkins seems like an interesting guy, but wow, is he not a very good comedic actor. I can understand why he was stuck doing Psycho sequels again and again. I had to put this on mute at one point because the maid was singing and it was god awful. Like, it's the worst noise on the planet, listen. Elizabeth moves the portrait of Anthony's first wife, despite being constantly told not to. Honestly, when I watch one of these pilots that aren't funny, I usually just sit there with an expressionless face. But for a second during this pilot, I caught my reflection on my computer screen, and I could just see myself, sat there completely baffled. I just couldn't believe what I was watching. It's downright awful. Elizabeth finds that Anthony's dead wife has vanished from the portrait after she moved her. It's then suggested, well, straight up said, that Edgar is having an affair with the maid. Yeah, alright. What can we say about it? Let's just move on. Elizabeth goes downstairs to find the piano playing itself. Insert that DJ Khaled meme here. Then she's pushed down the stairs by the ghost of the dead wife. This is where the only funny moment of the pilot happen. When she falls downstairs, I'll play the clip.
Elizabeth!
I'll call an ambulance.
No. It's too late. She's dead. Oops, sorry, my mistake. Call the ambulance.
Yeah, that's genuinely the only funny moment in the whole thing. I enjoyed that one joke, so well done to them. The dead wife is a skeleton, and she crawls out from under the stairs. God knows what she was doing there, and now she's just a talking skeleton. What is this? What am I watching? This is crap. Ironically, she looks very similar to Norman's mother in Psycho. He has a dance with the corpse of his dead wife, and then this rubbish comes to an end. This was awful. I really didn't like it. It was boring. I hated every character, especially that little prick Edgar, and it was filled with bad puns about murder every other sentence, and yet they never make a direct joke about Psycho, which feels like it would have been an easy way to knock it out the park. They made a million jokes about death. How difficult would it have been to just make a direct reference to Psycho? Weirdly enough, Perkins played Norman Bates again, the same year he filmed this pilot, in Psycho 4, The Beginning, which I swear was a real movie. I'm not making this up. And Psycho 4 was about Norman Bates being worried that he'd pass on his psychopathic nature down to his own son. If only his character in this pilot had had that same worry, we wouldn't have had to deal with this creepy weirdo for half an hour. One of the worst things about this pilot is that it's shot in front of a live studio audience, which seems bizarre. See, if it was shot in a similar way to the creator's other show, Sledgehammer, this would have been a little better. I don't think anyone thinks a studio audience and some canned laughter make a show anywhere near funnier. I suppose it was popular at the time, but why? They proper dropped the ball by filming this live. It's gonna be no surprise where I'm putting this. I hated it. It was worse than Mr. Red somehow. This is for sure the worst pilot I've ever seen in my life. Perhaps some of the worst television I've ever seen. It was corny, unfunny, and disturbing. I 100% do not recommend. In fact, I hated this so much, I'm making a new category for the very worst of TV. I'll stick the Mr. Red pilot in that category as well. Right, usually we talk about pilots in much better quality than this one, in both video quality and entertainment quality. Let me know if you want me to talk about any particular unaired pilot. There's a lot to choose from. And subscribe, help us get to 4K. Right, I'll let you go. Bye.